Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it. Then you and I may well spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it once was like in America when men were free. Thank you.
Hello, and welcome to Battlefields. I'm your host, Ryan Fields, and with me tonight is Cody. How you doing, Cody?
Doing good. I'm doing actually really good because I got to help Virginia turn red.
That's right. It is a very good day indeed. Total red, too. Like, if there was an R in front of the name, they got in. That was amazing. So I know we're looking to brighter days for us coming up because of that. So, and we actually may mention a little bit of that in tonight's episode too. We're going to be talking with Rick Boyer of the Integrity Law Firm about some of the mandate type situations that we're all still kind of facing nationwide, really. But we want to get into it a little bit with him on what Virginia looks like currently and what we might kind of be looking at in the future. So,
yeah, we just got to hope that Mr. Youngkin doesn't turn around and slap us all in the face. I still don't trust anybody.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think he definitely made it pretty clear right there towards the end of the run. His last few weeks, he really started to come out and say some pretty strong stuff. I feel like he's at least voiced that he's against mandates, and you know, is as far as all the school issues that were going on.
I'm hopeful.
If he holds true to his word, I think we're looking up. So it's going to be good. But we still have a couple of months until he's actually in officially. So we'll see. But anyway, like I said, there's been a lot of activity going around really across the country. In several different states, we're seeing some positive, some negative. I know in Iowa, Governor Kim Reynolds just allowed residents to obtain unemployment benefits if they happen to be fired by companies that have mandates for them not getting the vaccine. Florida is kind of on top of everything. They, of course, DeSantis has proposed an end to corporations requiring the vaccines. He's put fines, I think, for mandates.
He's opening his ports up too. They got the first shipment in yesterday.
Right.
Was it yesterday?
Yeah, I think they've definitely started allowing.
I don't know when the first came in, but
right. Well, the other thing that they have proposed too is to actually end OSHA oversight and kind of create their own safety agency, which I think is pretty amazing because it's just kind of bypassing this whole deal altogether if they manage to get that passed. I know they're having some issues in their legislator though. Like DeSantis is pushing a lot of things, but they're kind of fighting within their own system a little bit over getting some of these things done. They've had some different like I said, just legislative issues. And one of the actual kind of negative ones is coming out of Texas. It looks like right now, Governor Abbott had proposed a bill to make businesses who require vaccinations vulnerable to discrimination lawsuits, but it was actually rejected by the Texas legislator. So
that's kind of shocking.
Yeah, out of Texas, I know that is strange. In Cook County, a judge suspended requirements that all Chicago police officers be vaccinated by the end of the year. There was an Illinois judge that issued a temporary restraining order barring hospital systems from putting unvaxxed workers on paid leave. And let's see, there was also Senator Ron Johnson was doing some hearings with a lot of the vaccine injured. They had all these different witnesses that were talking
Really?
at those the other day. Yeah, that was painful to listen to. I mean, just
I
some
bet.
horrible stuff.
But that's a huge step in the right direction.
It is, and I mean, I don't. Again, it's currently going on, so I don't really know where it's going, what the end result of it'll be. But just that there is someone who's getting that out there, and that they're hearing it. So the main one that we're going to mention once we get Mr. Boyer on the phone here soon is the case that an attorney, Mike Yoder, actually has a federal case right now that is really for mostly in the realm of religious exemptions, but he's trying to get a hold put on the advancing of these mandates until they kind of get to the bottom of this. And
Who is Mike Yoder? Is he just a senator? Or,
no, he's a lawyer. He's the lawyer who's heading the case. I think he's representing about 30 to 40 people right now, just in the beginning of this case. I don't know how many, if more are able to kind of jump in on it, but he just kind of lumped all that together and took this one on as a federal level case. So again, that's still kind of pending because they kind of put an ultimatum to the government of, like, what's your response to this? They had a deadline. They responded back, and again, they're all still kind of active. There haven't been any of them that are definitive, yes or no's. But there's a lot of action being taken. Is the point? It's just
Right.
across the country. It's people are seeing what they can do. To push back on the mandates themselves. So we'll see where a lot of these go.
Yeah, well, I hope that the country just continues to go in the direction it's going. I don't know, the governorship and all of these other races were extremely encouraging.
Oh yeah,
Just across the country, every election is just blood red.
Yeah, well, and even the New Jersey one, I think now it's official that the Republican candidate did lose, but it was, I think it was by 7,000 or something, maybe. I think was the total count. That's what I saw last. It was somewhere in that range, but razor thin in comparison of New Jersey. What it should be. They almost lost that one. Even though it's still a blue state, it's clearly not still a blue state. So,
Yeah. We'll see what happens with that. But
yeah. Well, anyway, let's see. We'll try to get this set up and get Mr. Boyer on here. Mr. Boyer, thank you for giving us a call tonight. This is this is my co-host, Cody.
Good to meet you, Cody.
you too.
So how you doing tonight?
Running around like crazy.
I'll bet. Yeah, it's a good day though. We were just talking about that. It's it's looking up for us a little bit here.
It is. I said that this morning. Some folks who didn't understand what six Semper Tyrannis on our state flag means, they just found out.
Right. There you go. That's right. Yeah. Well, again, thank you so much for calling in with us tonight. I guess we could just get started. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and then also about your law firm?
Sure. I've been involved in conservative activist politics long before I got into the law. I've done that since this will be my 30th year of being involved as a volunteer in conservative politics. I've started at 16 years old. I went back to law school. It was more or less my midlife crisis. I've been in the construction world for my entire career and hated it. And went back to law school in 2007 as sort of a midlife career change.
Okay.
My practice is built really just a small town general practice here in Lynchburg, Virginia. But I've of late have started to get some constitutional cases. I've argued First Amendment, free association cases in front of U.S. district courts here in Virginia, the Fourth Circuit. One of my criminal cases went to the Virginia Supreme Court where we were successful, so that was a lot of fun.
Okay.
But really getting into a lot more constitutional, religious freedom, personal liberty cases, doing some stuff for some Second Amendment groups. So really, that was my hope when I went to law school, is that I could use the law career to help to advance freedom. And it's over the last several years, we've really begun to be able to be involved in some of those battles and enjoying it tremendously.
Okay,
Wow,
great.
that's awesome. So you came from blue collar lifestyle into the law, huh?
Now I'm just a blue collar guy wearing a suit.
That's what we
Hey.
need. That's awesome.
But so are you originally from around Lynchburg area, or?
Almost originally. My dad was still with the Air Force in Panama City, Florida when I was born. He got out a month later and moved here to go to what's now Liberty University.
Okay.
And so we've been in Lynchburg since I was a month old. So
Oh, wow.
47 years this month, I guess.
I think that counts. Yeah,
It does. Close enough.
Yeah. Well, we kind of just really wanted to talk tonight about, I guess, the current situation, like you just said, with the mandates. We've seen a lot of pushback in some other states. We were just discussing some of those before getting on with you. Just across the country, there's a lot of different activity going on. Some positive, some negative. But I guess we'd like to get your take on where we kind of currently stand in Virginia, and what is the actual status of the mandate as far as enforcement of it from the Biden administration and OSHA right now.
The difficulty is the more recent mandate is federal, coming down from Joe Biden,
right?
Which you all probably understand right now has no force whatsoever. It's just a statement from the president.
Right.
Basically, he has directed the director of the Department of Health and Human Services, which oversees OSHA, to promulgate regulations that would require any employer of more than 100 employees to vaccinate all their employees. Right now, there's still no regulation promulgated, but it's a catch-22 for those of us in the conservative legal world who would like to file suit right away.
Mm-hmm.
But until they actually pass the regulation, there's nothing to sue over and there's no defendant.
Right.
And so we're waiting for them to pass a regulation. But in the meantime, all the companies are cowering and panicking and caving in to the Biden administration. Right now, there's nothing more than a threat. But when the federal government is threatening you, it's a pretty powerful threat.
For sure.
So the biggest problem we have is the employers who have more than 100 employees who feel like they don't have a choice because of the federal mandate. Now, the federal mandate, unless there is a clear religious exemption in that mandate, I'm confident that eventually the Supreme Court is going to require a religious exemption. The problem is, by the time it gets to the Supreme Court, you may be a year or 2 years down the road. And in the meantime, people may be out of work or looking for a new job, waiting for the Supreme Court to eventually vindicate their case 2 years down the road.
Yeah,
that's no good.
Unless you have either a religious or a medical exemption right now, no one has had any success against the mandates. Again, I do think eventually, I think the federal mandate is going to be and should be declared unconstitutional. The federal government, the power to enforce a vaccine mandate, a quarantine, anything like that, any sort of health-related requirement is clearly reserved to the states. And the Supreme Court has said multiple times there is no so-called police power at the federal level. Those police powers are state and federal or state and local powers. Now, the Supreme Court held in the Jacobson case back in 1905 that the states and localities have the power to pass, and I quote, health laws of every description, unquote. So basically, the states and localities have vast power, as the Supreme Court sees it, to pass health laws of every description. The federal government just does not, and would have to basically try to claim that under the Commerce Clause power, which is probably more detailed than we'll get into today. But I don't think it's going to survive Commerce Clause review when it gets to the Supreme Court. I anticipate eventually the federal mandate being shot down as unconstitutional, much like President Biden's federal eviction moratorium was shot down. I believe it was 9-0. The Supreme Court shot it down and said that the federal government has no power to enforce a nationwide eviction moratorium.
Right. Okay.
but in the short term, people are losing their jobs and there's not a lot of immediate redress. If you have a religious or medical exemption, some folks have been having success, but short of that, there has not been a lot of success against the federal mandate. At the Virginia level, I think that will start changing with the new administration. I don't anticipate. I think when Mr. Youngkin said in his victory speech last night, Virginia will be open for business, I suspect that's part of what he meant. We're not going to shut businesses down over vaccines and mask mandates and so forth anymore. Hopefully we can hold him accountable to that and need to hold him accountable to that. But I suspect after January, Virginia's rush toward mandating vaccinations for employees, for school children, is probably going to die on the vine. Hopefully, and as long as we do our job in pressuring the governor, I anticipate that a lot of that pressure will die on the vine, and then we're left with the federal mandate.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, speaking to that federal level of the mandate, we wanted to talk with you a little about the case that attorney Mike Yoder is bringing against the federal government right now. That I guess I know
I have not even seen that case, Ryan. So I'm not going to be qualified to speak to it. If you can give me a little bit of detail, I might be able to sort of shoot in the dark a little bit. But I'm not familiar with the case.
Oh, sure, yeah. As far as I think I know he's representing a group of about 30 to 40 people right now, and it does hinge pretty primarily on the religious exemption, and he had put kind of basically a request to halt the mandate until they handled the issue, and the judge actually was fairly approving of what they were putting out there, and they kind of put a deadline at the government to get back with their take on it. And I think that they came back with, there is no, like you said, there is nothing official yet as far as anything that is a requirement, anything that's an enforcement of this. So it's too early to, no one's really losing their jobs or anything yet because there's no enforcement, but clearly people are losing their jobs. So
and that's the difficulty, is the companies are firing people for fear of what's coming. I mean, they assume that as soon as the president opens his mouth, that it's federal law, and it's not. But they're assuming as much, and so the companies are sort of preemptively firing people for fear that they're going to be gigged by the federal government if they don't.
Right, and like I said, that's kind of where he was going at it specifically for the religious exemptions, and it's funny that they're using their own words against him, that they haven't done anything. That it's too early to put a case out there. But the last I heard, I think they had to get back on that that deadline that the judge had set on them, and so now it's all still current. It's happening, by the day. It's kind of. I was just wondering if you had any take on how that might be, where that might go at a federal level, what we could hope to see out of it even.
I had not, Ryan.
Okay.
I'm certainly happy to look at it. I'm Googling it a little bit as you're talking.
Sure.
Trying to get just a bit of a feel for it. It looks like so far we've had some positive rulings from the court. I don't know. I'm sure the Biden administration will challenge it. My understanding is it's a federal workers lawsuit, that it's federal employees, civilian employees, and military employees. And the court has basically said, we're not going to allow these military folks to be disciplined. The Biden order actually would require a dishonorable discharge for any military service member who does not take the vaccine.
Wow.
Which is hugely, it's full of disabilities once the member returns to civilian life. I mean, it's almost like a felony conviction if you're dishonorably discharged from the military.
Right. Yeah.
In terms of its impact. And that's precisely why the Biden administration did what they did. But my understanding, and just very quickly looking at it, is the judge has basically said until the court has opportunity to rule on the the merits of the case, the federal government cannot enforce it, cannot fire federal employees, and cannot fire military members, cannot discipline them, cannot punish them. So it's a temporary restraining order, basically, until the court can rule on the merits of the case. So it's very positive. A number of cases have been filed already challenging colleges, public universities, and other public entities that are forcing the vaccine mandates. They have, some of them have gone as far as a single justice of the Supreme Court asking for review by the whole Supreme Court. So far, they really have not been granted. You have the usual three suspects, Justices Alito and Thomas, and I think oftentimes we're getting either Kavanaugh or Gorsuch. So we're getting three justices, usually Gorsuch, I believe, Alito and Thomas, that are in favor of considering the challenge and think that it ought to be heard, ought to be brought up before the entire court. Justice Thomas is absolutely my favorite justice, and he was even when Justice Scalia was on the court. Thomas is a hero. But so far, I think Justice Barrett denied review, and a couple of other justices have denied the entire Supreme Court review of the case thus far. So not totally encouraging results at all from the Supreme Court. But right now, at least, the Biden administration is blocked from terminating or disciplining federal employees until this case gets heard. So kudos to Mike Yoder and his team, and at least a temporary victory.
Yeah.
Will these cases with federal employees, will the court rulings on that set precedent for private employees?
It will depend on what legal theories the plaintiffs are arguing. I hope they should argue that the federal government has no police power to do this sort of thing. If you look back and in previous iterations of pandemics, you look back at the 1700s with the smallpox pandemic or the early 1900s with the Spanish flu.
Yeah.
There were a lot of quarantine, social distancing requirements, even some inoculation, vaccination requirements. All those were imposed at the state and local level. No one even dreamed, even in the early 1900s, the federal government would have any authority to do this sort of thing. And the Supreme Court basically has, in the case of immigrants or military members, because military members basically give up some rights by becoming members of the military. Right. They have to take orders that civilians don't have to take. Sure. And when they tell you up and leave, you have to up and leave. So the courts have said that the government has broader power with immigrants and with immigrants who are non-citizens and with military members. Otherwise, there is no Supreme Court decision to suggest that the federal government would have police power to enforce something like this. So I hope that the plaintiffs' attorneys on this are arguing the federal government is utterly without authority to enforce this, and it needs to go back to the states and localities. That should be a winning argument, but I'm not sure if it's one that Mike Yoder's making or not.
Okay. Well, now the other ones that you mentioned that you were a little more familiar with, are those all either, I guess, medical or religious exemption based at this point?
Yes. At the federal level, I think the whole mandate is unconstitutional because the federal government is without power under the Constitution to impose it. So the entire federal mandate should be shot down. At the state and local level, unless you have a religious exemption, or in some cases a medical exemption, the courts, including the Supreme Court, have been very deferential to state and local government authority on these issues. So at the local and state level, in most states, unless you have a religious exemption, most of the states are starting to impose some vaccines. Now, some of the more conservative states, and I'm trying to think of some of the ones off the top of my head, but a number of states are actually passing state bans on vaccination mandates, basically saying you cannot enforce a vaccination mandate in our state. Okay. A lot of the Western states, a lot of the states that are farther south are doing this. There are other states that have conscience clause provisions in their legislation. Illinois has a very strong conscience clause provision that you cannot be forced to take a medical treatment that goes against your conscience. Now, both houses have now introduced legislation to change that with regard to the COVID vaccine, and the governor's promised to sign it, and so that law is probably going to change next year, but it won't be retroactive. So at least for now, employees in Illinois can maintain their employment based on the conscience clause. So among current states that do have some conscience clause protections would be Kentucky, Illinois, New Jersey, and for healthcare workers only, North Carolina. For healthcare workers and first responders, Oregon. A number of states have pending legislation for conscience clause protections. Alaska, Idaho, Indiana, Kansas, Louisiana, Montana, North and South Carolina, South Dakota, Tennessee, and Texas.
Wow.
Now, some of those states have Democrat governors who will probably veto it, and whether they can pass it over the veto or not, who knows? But those states all have pending conscience clause legislation. There's begun to be a lot of pushback at the state level in some of the more conservative states. Virginia, we're just not there yet, but Lord willing, after January, we'll have more legs to stand on.
That's
Right. Now, when you say conscience clause, is that not even? I guess is that separate from religious? Then that's just if you just strongly feel you shouldn't, or is that kind of also tied?
It depends. It depends on the states. Illinois, my understanding is it is a conscience clause. It's not limited to religion.
Okay.
Some of the states may vary, but your strongest argument is what the Supreme Court has called a sincerely held religious belief. That's
right.
under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. That if an individual has a sincerely held religious belief, the employer has to make a reasonable accommodation to that sincerely held religious belief, unless it is an unreasonable hardship on the employer or the employer cannot make the reasonable accommodation. Most of the employers so far have not tried to make that argument that it's an unreasonable hardship, we can't make an accommodation. Mm-hmm. Most of them have just either said, we don't recognize your religious exemption, or we don't think your religious belief is sincere. By the time those two arguments make their way to the Supreme Court, I expect those arguments are going to lose, because the Supreme Court's case law is just voluminous that if there's a sincerely held religious belief, employers must respect it as long as it is not an unreasonable hardship on the employer and as long as there is a reasonable accommodation that can be made.
Okay.
Aside from genuinely being afraid of the virus, what incentive does an employer have to reject a religious exemption? I just never understood why they would even not take it.
With a lot of the larger companies the leadership is pretty left wing. I mean, you see it when Georgia changes their voter laws to make them to improve voter security. Major League Baseball says we're going to pull the All-Star game out of Georgia. So a lot of it is the left wing, the woke corporate mob, if you will, trying to score political points. Others of it is they're just afraid of the public perception. They don't want to look like they don't care about the health of their employees or the health of their customers. Some of it is groupthink and the lemmings over the cliff. Everybody else is doing it, so we're going to look bad if we don't do it. A lot of them are for most of them, it's just they're afraid of the Biden administration. For most of them, they're intimidated. They don't think they have any right to push back, any options to push back. And it's easier to push back and replace employees than it is to push back against the president of the United States.
Right.
Now, as far as the religious exemptions go, I mean, I guess, like you said, I know that there were some around here, different businesses. I think Sentra being one specifically, that it was, kind of random almost how they were accepting some, rejecting some, but then there were some that said they actually had some pushback on it, where they did kind of insinuate that they didn't think it was sincere. They wanted to know why what religious belief it was that they felt that they shouldn't take that.
It wasn't every case.
Right, not everyone. And I guess in some other states, there's been more of that sort of a blatant challenge to it instead of just an acceptance or rejecting of it. But what exactly does that, I mean, I guess, for you personally, your personal thoughts on it, as well as just someone who, what would be the case for if you are challenged with that? as far as someone wants to know why you have that strong held belief that how would you respond to that? Is that even right for them to ask you that, and how would you respond?
Sure. Well, Centra, to their credit, after giving a lot of their employees a lot of heartburn, got a lot of pushback from their employees, and Centra, to their credit, has begun to take a pretty reasonable approach to granting religious exemptions.
Right. Okay.
Which still leaves you on the outside looking in. If you really don't have a religious exemption, you just don't think you ought to have to put something in your body that you're not comfortable with. But with regard to religious exemptions, at least, Centra has morphed into a pretty reasonable position. Others, BWXT, for example, there's an employee protest going on downtown today, or was going on a couple hours ago, with a lot of BWXT employees protesting. Their policy has been to more or less take a position that we don't, sort of a prospective position, if you will. We really don't believe you. We really don't think this is sincere. We think you're making it up. I've talked to employees there that have given me some of the questions that BWXT is asking. How long have you held this position? Do you have this position with regard to any other medical treatments? Have you ever taken any other vaccines besides the COVID vaccine? What religious persuasion are you? Does anyone else in your religious persuasion hold to this? Basically trying to intimidate the employees into feeling like if I haven't always held this belief, or if I take other vaccines or other medical treatments, or if my pastor doesn't agree with me, or my denomination doesn't say I have to take this position, then this must not be a sincerely held religious belief. The Supreme Court has been painfully clear on this. It is not your pastor's call. It is not your employer's call. It is not your denomination's call. Liberty Counsel, God bless Liberty Counsel. If you go to their website, lc.org/exempt,
okay,
that's lc.org/exempt. They have some really good language there, some really good arguments you can make in your letter to your employer for your sincerely held religious belief. As far as the Supreme Court's concerned, it is, what is your sincerely held religious belief today? If you in the past had taken vaccines without looking to see if the vaccine was developed with a aborted fetal cell stem cell research line, but now the COVID vaccines generally were all developed with use of those fetal stem cell lines. They cannot look at you and say, well, all of a sudden you're getting your back up over COVID and you never even looked before. Most of us mature in our faith. I mean, there was a day when I was not a Bible-believing Christian. There was a day when I thought you could come to Jesus Christ and ask him for salvation and not confess him as Lord at the same time. And later on, you'd make him Lord of your life, and you get him as a sort of a two-part deal. He's Savior today and he's Lord later on. I've since matured in my belief, and I don't think you can have Jesus as Savior if you don't acknowledge him as Lord. So it doesn't matter what I used to believe. The question is, what do I believe right now today?
Right.
And Liberty Counsel's website has some really good language to use if your employer tries to hammer you with those questions. It's basically an inappropriate inquiry under federal law. They're obligated to consider your current sincerely held religious belief, not any belief you may have held to in the past.
Okay. That's great. It's great to know. It's also completely horrible that BWX and others, wherever in the country that are doing that.
That is extremely manipulative.
For BWXT, it's not just intimidation at being afraid of fines or punishments. They're also afraid of losing the contract because the federal government is far and away their largest customer.
That's their entire industry. Is government contracts.
Yeah. So I guess we've also kind of seen a lot of as far as those businesses that are not necessarily large, like Centra or like BWX, but even corporations, businesses, retail stores, that type of thing that we would be going in and out of, that they've started taking it upon themselves to enforce the mandates, both not necessarily in Virginia as much, but some in other states as far as vaccines, but even some here in Virginia that have almost kind of started to bring back the mask requirements. And I guess, again, that's the only real requirement is on the school, kids and teachers and all in schools right now. It's just more of a suggestion as far as it goes for everyone else in Virginia right now. So I guess, what rights do we have when we're, say, entering a business that has set a policy that they appear to have no real means of enforcement established?
So I actually have a quick example to give of this.
Okay.
I was traveling. I went to Kansas City, and it's a border town, so it's half of it's Kansas side, half of it's Missouri side. And the county of Missouri, they had I think a mask mandate in place. But I went into Walmart, and the lady at the front was saying, "Hey, do you have a mask? Do you have a mask?" And I walked right by because I'm done with it personally, and I didn't put it on. And she started yelling at me. I turned around, I just told her no, and kept going straight to the fishing section. Picked out my Senko worms and went and paid. Now she had started calling security as I walked in, but nothing happened. They didn't do anything. So would I if I got thrown out, who would have been in the right? Would I have been able to sue them or what? Like I was just taking a shot in the dark there, but
a private business has the right to exclude. Now it may not be in their best financial interest, economic interest to do this. A private business has the right to exclude as long as it's not on a prohibited basis of race, religion, sex, national origin, so forth, disability status, what have you, age. But as long as it's not a protected class, a private business can exclude. The personal position that I have taken is if they don't throw me out and they'll take my money, I'll patronize them. I haven't been wearing the mask either. I've been ignoring it. Other than in courts, the courts require it, and you can't get into court without it. You can't get past the security. I have worn it when I have a court-appointed criminal client who is in jail. The jails require the mask, and I don't want to bring something into a controlled space like that where you have a captive audience that if something starts in a jail or a nursing home, it spreads like crazy. So I would have agreed to wear the mask there, even if it wasn't required. But I've only had one or two stores that have been really forceful about it. You can't come in without it. And I've generally just taken my business elsewhere and said, if y'all don't need my money, then I can find somebody else who will. In the early days is when they were really panicky about it in May and June of last year. Convenience stores along the interstate were about the only place you could even get in to use the bathroom. I mean, everybody was crazy about it. Now you can pretty much get in. They'll post the sign on the door to protect themselves from the Northern regulation here in Virginia, but they're not going to throw you out. They want your money. For most places, that's the case. And I was even up in deep blue Charlottesville yesterday as an election observer for the Republicans, and I went into a convenience store, and most of the other people had masks, but nobody said anything.
Okay.
So it'll depend a lot on the establishment. They have the right to enforce it. I've sort of taken the personal position that they're not doing it because they want to. They want my money. They're doing it because they're scared of the governor.
Right.
If I really thought the store didn't want me, I would respect that store owner's property right, and I'd go somewhere else. But most of them are doing it because they're afraid, and I'm not going to play into the fear. They don't want to do it. They feel like they're forced to, and I just won't be forced. And with regard to your other point that you raised about schools, actually, it is not the law in Virginia that school children have to be vaccinated. Whether at the statutory level, there are certain vaccinations that school children are required to get unless you have a religious exemption. The standard measles, mumps, rubella, polio, smallpox. I guess not smallpox anymore; that's been eradicated. But your basic childhood vaccines are required for school children unless the parent has a religious exemption. COVID has not been applied as one of those vaccines as yet. And I'm pretty confident with the new administration, they're not going to try to make the argument we can sort of force this, even though it's not in the statute. I think if McCullough had won, you would see the State Board of Education would try to force it even without waiting for the General Assembly to change the statute. I think you would have seen the Democrat General Assembly, if McAuliffe had been elected, you would have seen the Democrat General Assembly probably change the statute to require the COVID vaccine along with the other standard vaccines. With the Republicans back in charge in the House and a Republican governor, I think all that is, here in Virginia at least, probably dead on arrival.
Okay, well, great. That was actually going to be my next. With the schools, I know, more specifically with the mask mandate that they have right now, but the vaccine, that was, we're all riding high on the result of that election yesterday right now, but we're not out of the woods yet because we still have a couple of months left of Emperor Northam,
Yes.
to that's what, do you think it would be possible for him to try to push something in there these last couple of months? But if
he tries to push a vaccination mandate at this point, I think I'm sure that plaintiffs and attorneys would be asking for a temporary restraining order given the incoming administration, and I would suspect that would probably be granted.
Right. Okay.
It would be foolish to force people to take the vaccine if it's not even going to be required after 2 months. So I anticipate the judge would probably say there's irreparable harm here because that policy is likely to be changed, and therefore we're going to forbid it until the new administration takes office and tells us what they're going to do. So with regard to the masks, though, there is a mask mandate that's been imposed by the health department in
Right.
public schools. Actually, it's been imposed on private schools, although to their credit, a lot of the private schools are just saying, we're going to leave it to the beliefs and the choices of the parents, and we'll let it be enforced by the parents. If you want your child to wear a mask, we'll do that. If you don't, we're not going to be the enforcer. And so far, that has been a successful strategy for a number of private schools. Again, I would anticipate even the mask mandate will at least come into play with the new administration. I see the Youngkin administration as being very, and I say conservative, not politically conservative, but strategically conservative. I think they're going to probably nibble around the edges. That's certainly the impression I got from the victory speech last night. I did not get the impression that they're looking to make wholesale changes. So I think we'll have to hold their feet to the fire as far as the mask mandate goes. I think they will be reluctant to make dramatic changes unless there's a lot of public pressure.
Okay.
Now, I have one more quick question on the deal with private businesses. Is if you can get a religious exemption for your employer and for them that can bring a religious discrimination case if they reject it, maybe could that apply then to a private business as well? If I'm religiously exempt from wearing a mask or getting the vaccine by my employer, shouldn't that hold true everywhere?
That has begun to be talked about among the conservative constitutional lawyer circles. I don't know if it has been litigated. If it has, I'm not sure if it's been litigated successfully as yet. I know it's conservative attorneys who begun talking about it to argue, for example, the public access laws, the businesses that are considered places of public access, you can't discriminate anymore. It used to be that the court said back in the Jim Crow South, if it was your private property right, and if a white business owner didn't want to let a black person in, well, that's just a property rights issue. Well, the Supreme Court has long since said that if you're a public accommodation, you cannot discriminate against your customers on the basis of race, religion, sex, national origin. So it has at least been talked about that if folks have a religious objection to a vaccine, for example, I don't know of any private businesses, public accommodations, private businesses that have required a vaccine to enter. And I don't know of folks who have made a religious challenge to the vaccine mandates. I don't even have a religious objection, if you will. To the mask mandate. I keep conflating the two. There are two very, very different issues here. The vaccine mandate, I absolutely have a religious objection to taking it. The mask mandate, I don't so much have a religious objection to it as a personal liberty, freedom objection to it.
Right.
There's no personal liberty or freedom exception to under Title VII to employers, even employers and employee relationship. Probably on the public accommodation side, there's also not going to be a personal freedom, personal liberty objection. If someone did have a sincerely held religious belief against wearing a mask, I think that would at least have some chance of being successful against the private business. The question is, could you convince a court that you had a sincerely held religious belief against wearing the mask or not? And that may be a difficult hurdle.
Okay. I know that back at the beginning of the school year, there were several different, different activist groups, as well as many pastors that had signed on trying to get those into the school system.
Yeah.
And
LCA accepts religious exemptions for the masks.
Yeah, LCA, but even as far as the public schools around, and it all just kind of seemed to peter out. Like it's clearly written in the governor's mandate, religious exemptions, but then it doesn't really seem like the school systems themselves, the public schools anyway, have even acknowledged that exists. It's just, everyone is still masked. I don't know. I can't speak to the counties as much, but I haven't heard anything major out of them that they acknowledge that. But like Lynchburg City, it just wasn't brought up again.
Campbell County, where I live, Campbell County School Board is 7-0 far left. It's an unfortunate reality that your school boards attract far left people. Mm-hmm. They're generally, the goal of somebody running for school board is to get more taxpayer money for your local school. It is not first and foremost serving children. It's not first and foremost, I want to make sure what my kids are getting taught and make sure they're not getting critical race theory or the 1619 project.
Right.
Most folks historically who have run for school board is you're not giving me enough of your taxpayer dollars to my child's education, and I'm going to run for school board and make sure that you do. So the school boards tend to be dens of rattlesnakes in terms of they're very, very left wing. Mm-hmm. Not that it's bad to want more dollars to go to your child's school necessarily, mm-hmm. but they don't attract people that are there for smaller government reasons, certainly. So when the governor says to people who ran for school board on the basis, I want more taxpayer dollars, and the governor says, you're going to be in trouble with me if you don't enforce the mask mandate, there's not going to be any pushback. They're already predisposed, pre-programmed.
Right.
All of a sudden, you're seeing a lot of pushback against the guys and girls' bathrooms after the abominations that have happened in Loudoun County, which were totally predictable to thinking people. But now that those things are starting to happen, now that you have, I call it critical racist theory being taught in the schools.
Yeah.
They're calling it other things, social emotional learning and other feel-good titles to disguise what they're doing. Mm-hmm. But now the parents are waking up. And the problem is this has been taught in the schools now for generations, and we're only just now awakening up to what's being taught. Mm-hmm. But now you're having a lot of people that are concerned about critical race theory, the guys marauding in the girls' bathrooms, and the mask mandates is sort of the cherry on top, if you will. To me, I don't really care why somebody wants to get involved in their child's education. To me, I get a lot more upset about guys being in my little girl's bathroom, or my child being taught that America is evil and it's hopelessly racist and you can't get ahead based on your skin color in this country. I get a lot more upset about that over my kid being forced to wear a mask at school. But whatever motivates people to get involved and say the government has too much power, parents should have more choice, it ought to be up to the parents and not up to the bureaucrats in Richmond and Washington. Whatever it is motivates that parent to get more involved, I will take it. And we're seeing a huge pushback on all three fronts: the masks, the critical racist theory, and the guys and girls bathroom. I refuse to call it transgender bathrooms because there's no such thing as transgender. It's God created man and woman, and that's where we are. And
right,
that's right.
Yeah.
You pretty much have to be a science denier to argue otherwise, because people either have one body part or another, and here we are.
It should be a conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't I don't concede to the other side's terminology. We lose when we concede the terminology.
That's right.
Right. So, well, I guess, like you said,
Let's say that I'm not sure I ever answered your question. The answer is most of your school boards are full of left-wingers who are not interested in listening to a religious exemption. Their government is their God. Their local schoolhouse is their local church house. And they're interested in defending that interest, not your religious liberty interest. And that will not change unless and until you do like Bedford County did yesterday and 2 new conservative write-in candidates get elected to the school board.
Right.
That's where it has to go. You can recall your school board member. It takes a little more doing, but if you don't want to wait for the election 2 years down the road, I think it's 15% of the voters in the district have to sign a recall petition, and then you put him back on the ballot next year and vote him out next year. So there are more than one way to skin that cat.
Yeah, that issue has come up in Lynchburg City a few times. All the surrounding counties can actually, they actually do elect their school board members, but Lynchburg, the city council appoints them. So and
Lynchburg, you can recall your city councilman.
Right. There was the petition going around a few months back that was to petition for city council to allow a hearing basically for election of school board members, and it didn't quite make the amount of signatures that they needed. It was just a little shy, and so they're going to be trying to get that back going again next year, I'm sure, because we're the only one around that they're appointed and not elected, and that's a horrible idea. So
agreed. Yeah, Lynchburg has been very resistant to it. The funny thing is that it's going to impact Lynchburg. The Democrat legislature, actually joined by my friend Amanda Chase, who should not have done this, but the Democrat legislature actually moved. Historically, a lot of cities and towns have held their local elections in May, and you have a lot less participation in May.
Mm-hmm.
So the Democrat legislature, in their infinite wisdom, with, again, the unfortunate support of my friend Senator Amanda Chase, actually changed the law to where now in the future, your local elections are going to have to occur in November. In most of your Northern Virginia and Richmond localities, that's going to help the Democrats. But the funny thing is, in Richmond, or in Lynchburg rather, Republicans usually win in November. Glenn Youngkin won pretty convincingly in Lynchburg yesterday.
Right.
So actually moving the city council elections to November is actually really going to hurt your overlords in Lynchburg City Council. And I anticipate seeing a major shakeup on city council next go round. And more than likely, you all are going to have the chance to have a voice in your school board members in the not too distant future, thanks to the Democrats.
Hey, well, we'll take it. I mean, that's got to wait another year, but I mean, sounds good. But no, I guess, well, again, thankfully, this may not apply as much to Virginia now, like because we've talked to that. But in some of the other states, do you feel like there might be, like we've seen with kind of the Second Amendment violations that were going on, how you had divisions into Second Amendment sanctuary cities,
right,
and counties? Do you feel like, and is there enough? I guess, is there enough weight behind doing that where, if a state has mandated something and you got counties that just swear off as, being kind of independent from that, they become sanctuary counties or cities or whatever. It doesn't necessarily apply to Virginia, but just as a thought, could that be something we're looking at almost?
To some extent, it's going to depend on the state. It's easier to do in most states than it is in Virginia.
Okay.
Most states are what are called home rule states. In a home rule state, unless the locality is prohibited by state law from taking a specific action, the locality can more or less do as they please. Virginia, on the other hand, is what's called a Dillon rule state. In Virginia, localities can't do anything without specific statutory authorization. So a home rule state, which most of our states are, unless the state legislature has told you can't, you've got a blank check. In Virginia, unless you've been given specific authority to do X, Y, or Z, you cannot do X, Y, or Z. Which is why the Second Amendment sanctuary resolutions, as helpful as they were for galvanizing public interest and attention, they really don't provide any real protection.
Okay.
If your locality can't stand up to if the state health department says we will shut you down, if you don't enforce a mask mandate, the city council or the local county board can't overturn the state. I would imagine in home rule states, you might be able to do that because your state enforcement power, and this is where it was going with the Second Amendment, you were going to have some pitched clashes between state health department folks coming into Lynchburg or Campbell County or Appomattox County and saying, we're going to shut your restaurant down. And we were looking for sheriffs with enough guts to bar the door and tell the health inspector, we're not going to let you in. We're the chief law enforcement officer in this county. You may not enter this restaurant. You may not close it down. You do not have access to the restaurant. That was the constitutional crisis that was coming in Virginia. If we'd have had sheriffs with the guts to stand, and hopefully now for the next 4 years, that's not going to be an issue. But that's where it was about to go in Virginia, was the lesser magistrate's theory that the sheriff, as the chief constitutional law enforcement officer in Virginia, forbidding state agents from coming in and shutting a business down. I don't know a specific sheriff yet who was gutsy enough to take that. There were a couple in far southwest Virginia. There was one in Culpeper who really had taken some really hard lines on the Second Amendment. Whether it would have gone quite that far or not, whether they would have been willing to go quite that far, I'm not sure. But that was the constitutional crisis that was being provoked. I would love to see a local legislature do that and say, we will not allow businesses to be shut down for refusing to force the mandate, and take it to the courts and see where it would go. In Virginia, it probably would not have been successful because we're a Dillon rule state. Again, fortunately now, hopefully, at least for the next 4 years, it won't be an issue.
Right. Hopefully. And I mean, to that, I guess it was just, we honestly weren't sure what we should be asking. We obviously had a lot of stuff kind of prepared to put out here and talk with you about, but I feel like a lot of our audience and a lot of people out there are kind of in the same boat, that everyone's obviously concerned with everything, but what should we be doing? What options do we have as far as these things coming up? Is there some kind of key point that we're missing in us not knowing the law? So, I mean, any advice or guidance you could give to that would, be greatly appreciated, just so everybody's well informed of what we got going on.
Sure. I'll try to give you just a short roadmap of what to do. If it's your child and a vaccine, or if it's your child and a mask mandate, right now there is no vaccine mandate for COVID for school children.
Right.
The health department is considering it.
Yeah.
Again, I suspect that with the new administration, that's going to be backburnered. But for the mask mandate in schools, these local school boards really have not been accepting religious objections. The solution to that is replacing your school board members in order to get that done. There's no long-term damage, if you will, to being for most children for being forced to wear the mask. If the child has asthma or some other medical exemption, you can if you get a doctor's note, you can probably get your medical exemption from most schools. If you want to fight over it, if you want to take a lawsuit up, absolutely get in touch with me, and we're happy to talk about it. But with the mask mandates in the schools, those are more difficult to fight. On the vaccine side, if your child's in schools, if they're trying to force the issue, absolutely file a religious objection, and worst case, pull your child out while it's being and either homeschool or put the child in private school while it's being litigated if they try to force the issue, rather than make the child take the shot if you have a religious objection to it.
Okay.
And most likely the religious objection in the school context to the COVID vaccine, at least here in Virginia, is probably going to end up being protected with the new administration. With regard to the vaccine, in the employee context, that's much, much tougher, especially if you work for a company with over 100 employees. They're absolutely panicked by the Biden order. So for that, your roadmap is go to Liberty Counsel's website. I am not a web guy. I wish I understood web design so I could really update my website properly. I need to I don't know, find someone younger than me who's better at it. But libertycouncil.org or lc.org, particularly their exemption page, lc.org/exempt, has the roadmap for you. They have draft letters that you can send to your employer to argue your religious rights. But the first thing to do, send them your religious exemption letter when they hit you with the mandate. And again, don't copy and paste the Liberty Counsel letter because they'll know it was copied and pasted, but use their arguments as a template or a scaffold for building your letter.
Okay.
If they either reject your exemption or indicate they're going to, immediately step 2. So step 1 is your religious exemption letter. Step 2 is file your charge with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Again, if you go to lc.org/exempt, the form is right there. If you go to eeoc.gov, you can find on their website how to file a charge of discrimination. Now they're looking for racist or race or sex-based discrimination or sexual orientation discrimination, but they also have to take up a religious exemption claim.
Okay.
So go to the eeoc.gov or lc.org/exempt. They can take you directly to the specific EEOC page where you file your charge. File that as soon as your company indicates that they are not going to grant your exemption or likely not going to grant your exemption. The EEOC historically takes several months to get to the bottom of these complaints, and that was before they had thousands upon thousands of new complaints over the vaccine. So it's going to take months to get it resolved. Once the EEOC looks it over, if they determine you were discriminated against on the basis of their religion, they will give you what's called a right to sue letter, and then you can go to the court and sue. Then call me.
Okay.
I'd be happy to help. And Liberty Counsel's helping a lot of folks. I'm certainly happy to help. But as soon as you have your right to sue letter from the EEOC, basically saying we think there's at least a valid argument that you may have a religious discrimination claim, then you can file your lawsuit. The downside is this takes months. There is no guaranteed. I can't sit here today and tell you there's a way I can absolutely keep you from losing your job. There's not. If your employer says, sorry, we reject your religious exemption claim, over time, clear through the Supreme Court, they're probably going to lose that fight. Over the short term, they fire you and you're on the job market looking for something.
Right.
Most courts have not granted temporary injunctions. Well, until the one with the federal employees, most courts have not granted temporary injunctions against employers firing their employees. Absolutely stand up and fight it. I mean, God bless the BWXT employees who stood up and fought today. The Sentra employees, the original indications out of Sentra were that they didn't believe us. They didn't believe their employees. My sister works there and she was given her exemption. But the original indications were, we don't think it's sincere. We think you just don't want to take this particular vaccine and we're not going to grant it. They got so much pushback from their employees. What I was hearing was less than a third of their employees had been vaccinated with a week to go before the deadline. Facing that level of crisis and being able to care for their patients, they ended up deciding to be a little more reasonable about granting the religious exemptions. So blessings on the WXT employees today who said, no, we're going to stand up and fight. Absolutely stand up and fight. But there's no guarantee that they won't fire you and you're having to look for another job while this case works its way through the court. I wish there was a magic, a kryptonite here I could offer, but there isn't. And in the long run, I think a lot of people are going to win these battles. They're going to get reinstated. They're going to get back pay. They're going to get damages. But in the short run, there's people who are either going to have a really tough decision between taking the vaccine or looking for another job and filing that EEOC charge, filing the lawsuit and vindicating themselves in court.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that you just made me think of that the situation going on up in New York right now, how they almost don't have a fire department or EMS or
trash,
police.
Trash 10 feet high, piles of trash 10 feet high in the streets.
That's the situation that they're in with the mandate, and they've got people trying to go against it, but essentially all these people have been let go from their jobs and society's not functional anymore. So
yeah, well, that was the I'm looking here again at the Mike Yoder case that you referenced.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at the complaint that Mike Yoder filed, and they're making that same argument. The country is going to be left vulnerable if you start having military members being fired left and right.
That's
You
right,
can't just
sure.
automatically replace. You can't just automatically replace well-trained and educated and higher up officer ranks. You can't just replace them immediately with raw recruits and expect that you're not going to create a readiness problem.
Mm-hmm.
And that was Mike Yoder's argument. I don't know if that argument's been raised in the context of the firefighters in New York or not. If not, it ought to be.
Right, for sure.
It seems like that's
I think Sentra was more or less forced by employees that just said no to take a more reasonable position. And I strongly, if you can afford to do it, if you can afford to fight back, if you can afford to risk losing the job, fight it, because other people's liberty is riding on it. Your kids' liberty is riding on it. I had a friend of mine who worked for it wasn't even his full-time job. He had a sideline gig as a referee. I forget if it was basketball or some other sport.
Okay. But
he would have been the perfect plaintiff because the league, the league authority that was trying to force the mask mandate on the referees basically said, we don't care about your religious exemption. We don't believe you. And in fact, they said, we're determined to squash this fake religious exemption nonsense by forcing our referees to take it. And I said, man, buddy, you're my perfect plaintiff. When you see them overtly, when you've got them on record saying they're overtly hostile to religion and they're trying to punish people for religious beliefs, I want you to be my plaintiff. Can I please use you as a plaintiff and sue? And he wouldn't do it because he said, well, I won't get to be a referee this year if they do. It wasn't even his day job. If I could find people in positions like that who are not losing their day job, but who can show clear, just invidious discrimination on the basis of religion, but you're not going to lose your day job over it. That's a perfect plaintiff. That's a case that you will win. You will be able to stand for freedom for yourself and a whole bunch of other folks. I've been trying fruitlessly to talk my buddy into letting me sue on his behalf. So if you're a person, if your viewers, your listeners are people in those positions who have been discriminated against on the basis of religion, and it's not your day job and feeding your kids at stake, you're the perfect plaintiff. Let's take that up and run with it.
Right. Okay. I mean, even a part-time job, small victory like that. I mean, that carries weight with it in argument for others. That
should set legal precedent.
Absolutely. And
right.
If you're and you may be a person who's so important to your company. I had a man who worked for a large company in Richmond who was so important. He was high up in their IT world, and they basically couldn't let him go. And he said, look, I'm just not taking it. Replace me if you can. And they said, well, okay, then we'll give you the religious religious exemption. But people taking stands like that are winning freedom because others then are going to look at that and say, well, you granted his on the basis of his religion, quote unquote. If you're granting his on the basis of his religion, then you can't discriminate against my religious belief.
Right.
So if you're in a position where you have that kind of bargaining power that you're too valuable to your employer to be let go, and they'll make an exception for you, then by all means stand for that exception. If you can easily switch jobs, then fight it. Force their hand. Take that other job. Force their hand. Let's take it to the EEOC. Let's take it to court, and let's protect the liberty of your kids and other Americans. If you can afford to make that sacrifice, and it's not a give in or go hungry kind of decision, we've got to fight these fights.
Okay, great. Yeah, definitely agree.
Yeah.
Well, I mean that's about all that we could, really think that we were really wanting to address with you. I mean, we greatly appreciate it. Is there anything that you want to, how do people get in touch with you? How do they follow what you've got going on? I know you have another seminar coming up, and
yes, tomorrow night at 7 at the Forest Library out on 221.
Okay,
Forest Road in Forest. We're going to redo the mask mandate, the vaccine mandate workshop that we did in October. That was very well attended. We had 80 some people there. Of course, Facebook got wise to it, and they're not running my ad this time, so I think it's going to be a bit lighter attendance tomorrow night because it's not getting the advertisement. But by all means, folks are welcome to come. Most of what we've talked about today and a whole bunch more will be on the PowerPoint tomorrow night. And anybody who attends we'll get their email. We'll send them a copy of this PowerPoint with Liberty Council's information on there, with EEOC's website on it. So everything we've talked about tonight will be in the hands, at the disposal of folks who attend tomorrow night. So I'd certainly encourage people to come on out to the Forest Library at 7:00. We'd love to see you. If you go to Integrity Law on Facebook, the event site is there. If folks are so moved, we'd certainly appreciate your sharing the event around and spread that. And they haven't banned my event yet. They just won't run the ad.
Right.
So share the event around. Let folks know. We'd love to have another good crowd tomorrow night. The website is integritylawlynchburg.com. All our contact information is there. You can email me at rickboyerlaw@gmail.com. That's just like it sounds, all small letters, no symbols. Rick Boyer. Boyer is Boyer. So rickboyerlaw@gmail.com.
Okay.
Email me, and I'd be happy to share the PowerPoint with you as well. But we'd love to see folks tomorrow night. There's strength in numbers. It was very encouraging in October. I mean, everybody who came into that room came in thinking they were the only one, and they left. You know what? There's a whole army of people who think like I'm thinking, who are willing to fight over this. So we'd love to see folks. Some free junk food will be out there, and we'd love to have folks join us tomorrow.
Okay, that's great. And we will try to be posting this episode tomorrow, so that is it'll be the night of when it posts. So, but as far as if anyone hears it and was to miss it, they can email you and get that PowerPoint from you.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for talking with us tonight, clarifying some things, and just helping us out.
It's incredible everything that you're doing. You're just an absolute weapon. Answer to prayer. Yeah. Really awesome to talk to you.
So are you guys. Man, getting the word out there is critical. And I don't know if you know my buddy John Harris, who also has a podcast who's here in Lynchburg. He's been taking up a lot of these freedom-related issues. I mean, the conservative podcast world has been one of the only links to reality in the post-reality world we've been living in since January 20.
Right.
And so you guys are doing a huge service. And I appreciate you guys being there, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be on with you today.
Oh, well, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. All right. Well, once again, thanks, and have a good night.
Thank you, guys. God bless.
All right. Yeah, you too. Thank you. All right. Well, I mean, that was awesome.
Oh, yeah.
So glad he was able to come on with us, and I definitely hope that was good information for everyone that's listening. I think that, I guess one of the other issues too to think about with legal matters, it is kind of intimidating because obviously many of us don't know what to do on our own, and of course he gave some great resources with the Liberty Council site that has kind of a step-by-step walkthrough, but also just the fee of taking on a case that, whether it's against an employer or against state, city, state, federal, even, but yet the strength in numbers aspect of that I know, like in the Yoder case, for example, I think he represents almost 40 people specifically, but that number's probably going to increase as it gains.
It hasn't already.
Yeah, as it gains momentum, since they've already kind of put a halt to the federal level of the mandate itself. So
now is the time to be collectivists,
right,
on this issue.
Yeah, I mean it as far as at a job or whatever the case may be, if it is going at it to an employer level.
And I'm telling you what, learn real estate, learn how to start a business, do whatever it takes to be able to quit your job and be okay at least, and just you just trust God. And
oh yeah, I mean, for sure. Which, I mean, that just something where you're not part of that system as much is great, but I think that the approach of going about it with groups of to bring if the situation gets that extreme for folks out there to put that, to, pull together, getting that legal representation. And so you actually have some ground to stand on, and the burden of it doesn't all fall on just one person, because, I mean, hopefully that, I would assume most people out there in these kind of mandate situations from a job and that type of thing, they're not alone. I mean, we saw that with, we talked of the Sentra situation, and then at BWX, there was, from what I saw, a pretty good group of people out there today that were protesting against that. So, taking that strength that you have in numbers and those that are against it, and really putting it to proper use in way of legal action against this stuff, because that's our path out of this. That just like we saw with the elections last night. I mean, that we've got the strength in numbers, and if we all are unified on it, and you got enough people moving forward with that kind of momentum, with the proper representation, then you have very strong ground to stand on as far as a pushback for these things. So that's my take on it, and that's what I hope that everybody got out of that. That it's not something we have to be so worried and intimidated by, because the options are there, and also just that things are looking up for our state here. In Virginia, we made some major gains last night. So, couple months left under one regime, and then chances are the a lot of the mandate type stuff hopefully won't be as much an issue. But that doesn't mean that we can let up either. Like Mr. Boyer said, holding the next administration's feet to the fire and making sure they stay true to that word as well. They've run their campaigns on this type of stuff, and so we got to make sure that that's what's done. That's what the people of Virginia voted for them to do. We don't want mandates. We do want our schools to be run.
The founding fathers wanted us to be the ones responsible for our freedoms, not the government.
Exactly,
and that's where we're having to come back to that mindset of taking responsibility for it, and not just hoping that the people in charge are going to do the right thing.
Right. Yeah.
No, you're free. You're a free people because God said you are, not the government. So act like it.
No, that's exactly right. And well, I guess that about wraps us up here for tonight. But everybody, to make sure to check out the meeting he was talking about, Mr. Boyer was talking about. That's on Thursday, November 4th, just in case we get this episode up tonight on the 3rd. And everybody, make sure that you subscribe, and you'll find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, YouTube, and Rumble. And again, just make sure you guys subscribe. That's what really helps us out the most, and so that you can see, keep track of us, know what we're putting up next. And
it helps us know how much our audience is growing too.
Right, exactly. And then we would love your feedback, any suggestions, any comments, any ideas on guests, topics, whatever you want to see us going into next. So you can reach us at battlefieldspodcast@protonmail.com. So thanks again, guys, and keep fighting the good fight, and God bless.
What will you do without freedom? Will you fight?